Welcome to the Toe the Redline podcast. My name is Adam Relitz, and I've partnered with Luke McDevitt. As both Orange Theory fitness coaches located in Akron, Ohio, we wanted to use our platform to spread awareness of the idea that experiences in life are determined by the limits we place on ourselves. In each episode, we'll cover different aspects of life, fitness, faith, and culture to unravel how we are able to build unwavering confidence in our abilities. Our mission is to help people uncover their truest potential and push the limit of excellence. It's time to toe the red line.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our first episode of Toe the Red Line podcast. My name is Luke.
My name's Adam.
And first thing you're going to notice is our voices, if you've ever met us in real life, don't usually sound like this. Both of us have had some sinus issues, and we're drinking tea right now. But you just got to start sometimes, whether you're prepped or not. So for those of you who don't know us, Adam, who are you?
My name is Adam Relitz. I'm 20 years old. I go to the University of Akron. Right now I'm an Orange Theory coach. I just started about 2 months ago. I was doing some personal training, but I've always had goals of becoming a strength and conditioning coach. I had a background in baseball, and now I'm just doing this podcast with you.
Yeah, perfect. And I'm Luke, and I'm 42, and I live in a van. That's about all you need to know. Down by the river. But I'm also an Orange Theory coach. We're actually recording this podcast at our Akron studio in the back room, which we're probably going to get set up. I think we're going to try to make it a video podcast eventually, but today we just wanted to get started and kind of go from here. So what is the name of our podcast?
So the name of our podcast, it took some time. We wanted to have something along the lines of the idea of redlining, but Toe the Red Line is the title of our podcast.
And for those who don't know what redlining means, so the actual definition is a recommended safety limit, right? The fastest, farthest, or highest point or degree considered safe. So when we say that, most people, when you say redline, you'd think of doing more, right? So we go to the gym to get stronger, or we're trying to get our finances in order, so we go try to find a way to make more money, or we're trying to get into more relationships because we want to have more experiences, right?
Or people sometimes say they're burnt out.
Yes, yep. So like they've pushed too far on the red line. But the red line also is going without in the same regard. So an example is like if you were trying to, at the end of every month, your budget's just not meeting, you're not covering all your expenses, right? So like generally people always think, well, how can I make more money? Which is true, and that is one way to solve the problem. But another way was like, how little could I live off of, right? So if I were to cut my budget $200 and at every month I still have an extra $200, like I can either make $200 more or spend $200 less dollars. But I think we have a tendency, at least in America, because we kind of have a more mentality, is it's always to have more. And redlining can be both of those things. And I know me and Adam just prior to this, we're actually talking about like in relationships with redlining. So do you know any people that are in bad relationships just because they can't go without?
Yes, or they go in social settings because they can't handle time by themselves.
Yes, so that would be the same regard as redlining, right? Like I want to have the most expansive experience I can have, and that's not always having more. Sometimes it's like being by myself, having like less social interaction because that social interaction maybe isn't the most positive or isn't the healthiest for me. So when we talk about this red line, it's how do we actually say it? We said how much we can do, okay, but also how much we could do without. Yes. And I think that's interesting. So one thing we thought about is, as like obviously Orange Theory coaches, when we talk about how much we can do, right? We have a benchmark coming up here on Thursday. Yep. So obviously trying to improve on those numbers, which is great, right? So like an example of that is how many workouts can we do? How many calories can we burn? Can we keep improving on our benchmarks? Can we keep, having the scale move the direction we want?
But the biggest thing is it's considered safe. It's not like we're burning out. We're finding the limit of what we can do.
Safely.
Yes.
Yep. And maybe that's 3 workouts a week. Maybe that's 6 workouts a week. I personally know we've had members that were doing multiple workouts a day, 2 or 3 a day, to the point where it was exceeding the red line. They weren't seeing the results they wanted because they were doing too much. Like their body couldn't compensate in a healthy way to recover from what they were doing. And that's where I think, once again, we're a culture that is if something is good, more of this is better. And that's not always true, right? Like there's limits to stuff. But with that, on the other example of a red line, right? So say you're just a mom, right? So you got a family, and your goal is just to live a healthy lifestyle, right? So maybe your red line isn't seeing how many days I can get in here and compensate, but your goal is how few days will it take for me to get in and work out that I can become healthy mentally, physically, to provide as much time and as much healthy experience with my family, right? Because it's not all of us want to be the greatest athletes on earth, and not all of us need a six-pack, right? But there is a level of healthiness we are trying to achieve, and sometimes it's like, how little can I do to achieve that? And there's nothing wrong with that at all either.
Yes. So what these red lines do is it allows us to learn more about ourselves, and it allows us to have the greatest range of potential experience.
Agreed. And that is... as Orange Theory coach, so you've been coaching for
almost 2 months now.
2 months?
Yeah.
Okay. What are some of the words that you hear from people the first couple times you meet them? Are there like limiting words that you hear from members sometimes?
Definitely like, I could never.
Yep.
Or I'm not strong enough for that.
Yep.
Or I can't.
Yep.
Just as simple as that.
Yep. And it's interesting because a lot of times when we hear this as coaches, it's from people who have never tried it even before, right? So like their initial approach to a unique, novel situation is, I can't do it. It's like, well, you don't even know.
Right.
You know, it's like we're doing a shoulder press. It's like, I got to do 8s because I can't do 10s. It's like, you've never even lifted a weight at all.
Right.
Like, don't tell me you can't do 10s because you've never even tried it. But obviously, when we have those viewpoints, we are limiting our experience, right? We don't even know what we don't know. It's like the only way sometimes you got to go grab those weights and we lift them, and that's why we have rep ranges and stuff. But it's like, but if you're finishing 12 reps easily, like you're not even close to your red line because you're not even struggling in any way.
Right.
So having these words isn't necessarily always true. So
a great example, an easy one is to say, ask ourselves, okay, if you don't know how many push-ups, or somebody asks you, how many push-ups could you do straight?
Yep.
And you don't know.
Yep.
You drop down and do as many push-ups as you can.
Yep.
And that was your red line.
Yep.
And sometimes we got to ask ourselves, was that truly our red line?
Yep.
Because sometimes we don't give the fullest effort. So we
Yes.
really don't know exactly how many we can do.
Agreed. And for those of you who know David Goggins, and David Goggins is obviously a very extreme example of this, but he says that when you think you've given your all, is it 60%?
I think he says 40%.
40%. He's like, when you think you've given your all, you've really only given 40%. Now, obviously, this guy's a Navy SEAL, but I would say the vast majority of the time I do something, I do not give my absolute best effort. I face a little bit of hardship as in terms, I'm running against that red line,
Yes.
you know, and like you can cross that red line. You don't necessarily want to do that. But I'm trying, what was our last benchmark? We just had a
500-meter row?
it was a running one, I remember. We had one recently, and I remember as soon as I finished it, I was like, I could have done better. Mm-hmm. Like, I knew right away. It was a longer one, and sometimes for me, at least the longer duration ones, it's easier to do this because you try to pace yourself, and at the end, it's like, I have more in the tank. But I knew right away, it's like, I could have done better. Mm-hmm. I definitely didn't approach my red line. But for a lot of people, we don't have literally the slightest idea of what that red line is.
Well, back in the day, when we were, fighting danger and running from danger, that red line was a natural way of our body telling us danger is near, be safe.
Yes.
But we live in a world now where everything is safe and controlled and in a safe, controlled setting. So we kind of tend to gravitate away from that sense of discomfort, even though we don't realize that it can allow us to be catapulted into a better version of ourselves.
Yes. And the discomfort of finding that red line or pushing on that red line is why people stop, right? So, like, think about the last time you've done something. It doesn't even have to be physical, but, like, I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe something at work where you were just getting really stressed, right? And it's like, there's red lines there as well. Like, there's only so many hours a day you can work healthily,
right?
And sometimes you got to take a breather. Like, actually, this morning, my voice was just killing me, and luckily Adam subbed in for me. But, like, I just knew if I keep pushing this, like, I'm going to actually lose my voice.
Yes.
And that's not where I want to go. So, like, I backed off from my red line just so I could continue to work for the next couple of days.
And sometimes during my weeks, I'm someone who always says yes to everything.
Yep.
And sometimes I put my own personal well-being on the back burner.
Yep.
And I'll definitely notice when, like, I'm finding my red line. Like, I'm still in a safe environment, but my health and wellness and well-being is starting to take a toll because of that.
Yeah. And even just your mental well-being, right?
Yes.
Like, if you're constantly... I have a brother who does this same exact thing, but he likes pleasing people and doing his best. But if it starts taking away from your family or your attitude, you know what I mean? Like, this is maybe a sign that we're pushing too far because we're getting more of a negative outcome from taking on these things that we really don't need to take on always.
We want these things in life to bring other aspects up, such as working out on a consistent basis. That applies to so many avenues of our life. But if it's starting to take away, that's when you know you're kind of crossing over that red line. The title is Toe the Red Line. It's not sprint through it and break through it.
Yeah.
We're towing that red line. We're finding it, but we're still kind of like dancing around it.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I think we really want to stress too about this is, like, in a safe way, right? So discomfort is not unsafe. Okay? Discomfort's not bad. In our current culture, I think that a lot of times we think everything is supposed to just flow and be easy. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily true. Like, anytime we're growing, we're going to have a level of discomfort. But that doesn't mean, well, if I want to be the best, I gotta handle all degrees of discomfort. And it's like, well, that's not true either, because there comes a point where you do cross that red line and we do start breaking down, mentally or physically as well. Mm-hmm. So, but some other things with that is, with our red lines, like, these are something that are not set in stone, obviously. Like Adam used the example of push-ups, right? So if we ask somebody, do the most push-ups you possibly can, and they get 12, right? Well, if they were to do that multiple times a week, 12 is no longer their red line. Now their red line is 14 or 16 or 20, and that's what we should be doing. We're trying to expand ourselves to have as many experiences, obviously, as we possibly can. So I think
with those red lines, they either progress or regress.
Yes.
They either go up or down.
Yep. And that'll be like, if you've ever been, where you were consistently working out and then you had an injury, or you had a project at work where you had to not work out quite as frequently for 2 or 3 weeks, you notice you don't come back in the same exact shape that we were when we left.
And people get discouraged.
Yeah. And they do get discouraged. And it's like, but that's going to happen. Like, that's the ebb and flow of life. There's going to be times where things are going smooth and everything's great, and these times, can last 6, 7, 8 months, a year, but, like, eventually there's going to be a day it's going to rain, and you got to be prepared for those days as well.
I think the importance of these red lines is that it allows us to have confidence in our abilities.
Okay.
Because how we build confidence is preparation.
Yep.
And how we prepare for things is by doing it on a consistent basis. Even if we're failing, we're understanding our capabilities better.
Yep, exactly. Like we talked with this benchmark thing, right? If you have no idea, you've never run 12 minutes, no matter what your number is, great. It doesn't matter what your distance is, but then next time we can learn more. But, like, if we're always shooting in the dark and we don't know where we can be, it's hard to figure out how far we can push ourselves, because we're going to come to that level of discomfort. And when you're facing that discomfort and you know that, you've done this 12-minute run and last time you got to 3/4 of a mile, when you start feeling uncomfortable and you look and it's like, well, I just got to get another 0.1 or 0.2 and I beat that. Like, that can help carry the confidence, knowing that if you keep your current pace a little bit longer, will get you to exceed that last benchmark. That's what's important, like, to be able to have confidence where we know we can push through maybe a little bit more discomfort than we had last time.
And I think that confidence gets built even on a daily workout. Like, let's say we're doing a 60-second all-out, and you're on the last 60 seconds of a 12-minute run.
Yep.
You can just kind of break it down into, like, okay, this is just a 60-second all-out.
Yep.
I've done hundreds of these.
Yep. Yeah, like, I've been uncomfortable here before. I just got to do it for another 60 seconds. Right. It's not that big of a deal, which is good. And
I think marathon runners do this a lot. They break down, 1 mile at a time.
Yep.
And they're holding that same pace, because if they think too much about how far they have to go, they get discombobulated, and they need to just be in the present moment and being where their feet is.
Agreed. And that marathon runners, there's something else. Like, this one guy just broke this world record. And do you remember what pace it was? It was like he was holding like a 4:12 mile, whatever. But if he looks at it as the whole marathon, right? Like, that's tough to do. But if he's just trying to stay on pace 1 mile after another mile, it's a lot easier mentally to digest, instead of thinking, I got to hold this for the next, he only did it in 2 hours, which is still crazy, just crazy.
Only 2 hours.
Only 2 hours. For those who've done marathons, you know what I'm talking about, because any long distance runner, not saying short distance doesn't have a degree of discomfort, but long distance running, when you're going, I would say anything over 15 miles, there's points where mentally your body's just
you bonk.
I'm done. Yeah, I don't want to do this anymore.
So when we're talking about Redlines, I think you explained this the best. Do you want to give an example of maybe the example you told me yesterday about how Redlines can either narrow our experience or expand our experience, and kind of build upon that?
Okay, yeah. So I was trying to think of a way where, because like I said, we have a culture where it's always more, doing more. And I was thinking okay, so say you were trying to do not a run, but a trail hike, right? And you're seeing who could hike the absolute furthest, right? So initially, at least in my head, I always go about okay, I'm going to start training, and I'm going to push as hard as I possibly can, and I'm going to, get the right supplies I need and X, Y, Z to see how far I can hike, right? Which is one way to approach something, and we can have success there. But another way is how few supplies do we actually need, right? So if we have 2 people who are hiking, and one guy, little with his pack and his ruck, has 30 pounds less, that's an advantage to a degree as well, because he can make it without, right? And sometimes we carry on more burdens, and it's another example is obviously with the budget, right? If we have poor spending habits, we can at the end of the month have more money if we keep making more money or if we keep working more hours. But it doesn't have to be that hard. We don't have to carry all these burdens of going to Starbucks 3 days a week and all this kind of stuff. It's if we cut all that out, we can still finish the end of the month with a higher budget by just going without to a degree. And that's something that I think when we're going to do some kinds of challenges and stuff, but going without is something that I really want to delve into, because I think it's something that's not done much in our society.
Right. Our culture is such a go, 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 especially in America. It's how much can you do? How much sleep can you do without? And sometimes we try to neglect things, and I would say our limits on things isn't always looked upon, such as social media or how often you're in a social environment. Some people, they can't do without certain things, X, Y, Z, you name it.
Yep. And I know multiple people on Friday nights that's that they spend time with people or do experiences that they don't even want because they can't be alone. I don't want to say
with their own thoughts.
And that's not good. That's something we should try to address just as much as, trying to get better physically. We should be able to try to do without, especially unhealthy, things that are unhealthy.
You wouldn't believe at college, especially nowadays.
I think I would believe probably, but yeah.
Such a different, I would be at lunch, and however many people, we'd have a big conversation, and so many people are just, they can't go 5 minutes or 2 minutes without taking their phone and checking it.
Yeah.
Or being on their phone during a conversation. The majority of people I would talk to at college, they can't even look you in the eyes and acknowledge you when you're walking past them. They can't say hi, especially at University of Akron. It was different at the school I went to in Nebraska, where it was a small Christian school. And most people at Akron, they can't even the social aspect. People cannot, they either haven't been involved in as much social aspect, or they can't do without the dopamine effects of social media and XYZ.
That's a very interesting thing in our culture, because it's the same thing as where we always want more. Look at your screen time, right? And you tell me you don't have time to do something, right? I don't have time to work out. It's open up your phone right now and let me see. Because if that's over 6 hours, you definitely got time. And I know mine's over 6 hours, so I'm not.
It's all about time management.
Yes, for sure.
And that could be a whole podcast in itself.
Agreed.
Time management of our red lines.
Yes, how much social. We don't even. As Orange Theory coaches, which happens in front, there is a level of social media we do that is beneficial to the student.
As a tool.
Right? As a tool, right? But I for sure exceed how much I need to. Yeah. But it'd be interesting to see how little, that would be a test maybe. Yeah. I'll do that for a month or a week. How little can I look at my phone this week?
Yeah.
Ooh, That's not bad. That's
a
not
good challenge, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But that, I think we're about 20 minutes in, which is kind of where we wanted to be.
Should we leave them off with some steps and how kind of shift their perspective?
Yeah, so like 3 things we were thinking about, like what are some things that we could shift our perspective on that wouldn't be as limiting to our experience, but more freeing to our experience. And one is just to acknowledge that there's always potential for growth, right? But it's going to be outside our comfort zone. So this is, I hear this a lot with people my age to around like 30, but they're at that point where they're trying to like figure out their next step in life. They're trying to figure out their career and family and this, and they're in a job that they've been in for maybe 5-10 years, and they just don't have the confidence in themselves to try to find something better, right? So it's like they think that just magically someone's going to say, hey, Adam, here's $1 million job doing the same thing you're doing. Like, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to be uncomfortable and maybe get rejected, but like, you got to get uncomfortable looking for something better if that's what you're looking for.
Yes.
And that is, if we all would just think about our lives right now, the best things that happened to our life, did they happen easily? And I don't know. Most things in my life that have been good.
Nothing worth anything is easy.
Yeah, like it was uncomfortable. It pushed me in different ways. I'm trying to think of anything that just fell into my lap.
We can talk about God a lot.
Yeah.
And God is a very graceful God, but sometimes miracles happen, and that happens through faith in Him. But honestly, no. Like, anything worth something is going to be uncomfortable, and anything you haven't done before, you're either being delusional that you are capable of anything without
some struggle.
Yeah.
And a learning, like even obviously this podcast, like, right? We're going to be better than that.
Of course.
It's our first time.
If our first podcast is the best one, we're doing it wrong.
Yeah, we're not quite accomplishing what we should be doing. But, so step 1, acknowledge there's potential for growth, but that you're going to have to get a little uncomfortable for it, right? Okay. Number 2, I would say, first and foremost is listen to your language. Okay. So if you would ask the average person, what do you say about yourself? What do you say? Like, I think we all try to have an optimistic view, or like, oh, I'm very open about things, and I'm very, I'm trying to think some examples of words. I'm open, I'm optimistic, and I'm this, and it's like, maybe, but listen to your words a little bit.
I consider myself hardworking and empathetic, but your actions kind of say otherwise.
Yeah, so first step is like, take a step back, like just view yourself from like third person and just listen to our language. And is there anything about that language that we would change? So someone told me this one time. They were like, think of everything that you said about yourself, and think if everything you said about yourself became true, would you change how you started talking about yourself? And Absolutely. It made me think, because like there's times when I forget my password on the computer, I'm like, you big dummy. It's like, quit forgetting these stupid things. You know what I mean? And it's like, now if those things, which I think to a degree they do become true the longer you say them, you know what I mean? But listen to our language. It's very important because it does tell a tale about our current mindset.
We put these labels on ourselves, and they limit us.
Yes.
You say, I can't do that. I'm weak. Yeah. I'm not fit enough. Yeah. I'm not capable of, you name it.
Yeah.
And it sort of puts a glass ceiling on our red line.
Yes. And where we won't even approach dealing with, how do I want to say it? So like an example is, like I have some family members who have anxiety, and when they face some stress, and thus there is some clinical level anxiety. I'm not saying that, but they'll be like, oh, I have anxiety, I can't do this. And it's like, but they'll stop without even trying because the label of this anxiety. And it's like, well, this is not a insurmountable mountain.
They'll lean onto that as somewhat of an excuse.
Agreed.
Because they don't want to face whatever problem that they're dealing with.
Yes. And like I said, there is times when that's true, but sometimes it's just we don't want to get our hands dirty. And it's like, it's not going to be great, but sometimes we still got to do. You just sent me a thing where it was, what'd the guy say? It was a saying. He said, I do what's required. Yeah. So it's like, I don't do what I want to do. I do what's required. And like
sometimes, and that's living by, instead of living based off of emotions and making decisions based off of emotions, we make decisions based off of commitments.
Yep.
Sometimes you're not going to want to do it, but you know what? It's required.
Yes. And in our culture, we actually we get protected from a lot of this. But like, think about, you're a caveman and your family needs to eat, and you got to go hunt down like a saber-toothed tiger. It's like, you definitely don't want to, but shoot, I got to go do what's required. You
want to die?
Yeah, it's like, this is what we have to do. But acknowledging that, like, get your hands dirty. Once again, there's levels of stuff, but that's where we got to find our red line. Like, are we not doing this because it's uncomfortable? Am I not doing it because it's going to hurt me? Like, there's a big difference.
You're avoiding that discomfort.
Yes, and that's something that the only way you're gonna know it is if you start testing ourselves and like seeing how far we can push ourselves.
So the first step is always acknowledging that there will be not only struggle, but discomfort.
Yep.
It is not going to be easy, and you might fail. You most likely will fail.
Yep. The first time, right? Might be discomfort this time, but the more we get into it, we get better skills, we get more confident. So first thing, acknowledging it, that there's potential for growth outside our comfort zone. Listen to your language. I got the hiccups. Listen to your language, but also, if your language isn't something you think is helping or building you, starting to change that language. I think that's critical. And then our third step was, with humility and grace, drop our egos and always ask ourselves a question. Not, did I do my best always? It's, am I happy with the effort I put forth, right? So there are numerous times in my life where, in hindsight, right, or the day after, like when I did my first marathon, it was like, I could have done better. I know I definitely could have done better. I didn't put the effort in I needed to. Because a lot of times, once again, we generally will see ourselves in a more positive light than we necessarily always is true. It's like, oh, I did my absolute best. And it's like, I mean, if you actually feel that, great. But you got to honestly ask yourself. And very rarely in my life have I said, I've done my absolute best. I can think of maybe, I can count on one hand how many experiences I've done where I've done my absolute best.
And I like to think about, this might be crazy, but if you put forth a certain amount of effort, and then you have someone holding a gun to your head and saying, now put forth your absolute effort, and if not, I'm going to pull this trigger. Do you think you could have done one more push-up? Or gone a little bit faster on your pacing? So that's what's key there. Is asking yourself, and only we know. Like, only you yourself will know. Being honest with ourselves.
And having, like I said, like, generally in where we're at right now, our repercussion is very mild, right? Like, if I'm on that treadmill and I don't get my PR, who cares? Like, literally nobody cares, right? But like I said, if you had a hard repercussion where if I don't do this, my dog gets kicked, or something like that, but gives you some motivation. So I used to have a friend who was a very good salesman, but he said that every single morning before he'd go, like, literally door to door knocking on doors, he would sit in his car looking at pictures of his family, right? His wife and kids. And he'd be like, if I don't get X number of sales today, like, he'd get in the mindset that they would be kidnapped and hurt bad. And it sounds crazy and it sounds wild, but he goes, I'll tell you what, Luke, once I did that for and he would spend like 20 minutes getting his mindset. He goes, I would make that many sales that day, right? And by doing that, he was very wealthy. His family was very well off, but he faced a level of comfort that he needed something to carry him through that. And what carried him through that was this obviously wasn't real, but he set a perspective of, if X doesn't happen, this happens. And he didn't want to do that, so he made sure he went through the knocking on doors and getting yelled at and all that kind of stuff.
And it could be as simple as, if I don't do this, then I'm letting myself down. It doesn't have to be anything extravagant, or you don't have to have these external things. Like, it could just be the idea that, I've committed to this, and I've been pushing myself, and I'm going to let myself down. Nobody else. Prove yourself right. I always say that in class, but it's so true. Don't think about proving other people wrong. All we're trying to do is gain confidence and prove ourselves right by consistently pushing past what we think we're capable of doing.
And that's good. And that actually, we'll probably talk about this a little more, but me and Adam are trying to get a December discipline, just something that can help people motivate themselves. But, like, think about that. Like, if you're setting this where I'm going to not go get coffee at all through the month of December or whatever, but, like, prove it to yourself that I can do this. You know what I mean? Because there's definitely going to be temptations throughout the month. So one thing I'm going to try to do in December, I think I'm going to go 3 days where I'm not going to eat on Monday, Wednesdays, or Fridays until I get home, which is on the 22nd. But, like, until then, I'm just not going to eat those 3 days, just because I want to prove myself that I can do it. I can go without that.
Finding your bottom red line.
Finding, like, my bottom red line. So once again, to finish up, acknowledge.
That third step is key.
Yes. So acknowledge there's potential for growth outside our comfort zone, listen to, and if we don't like it, change our language. And then with humility and grace, drop our egos, ask, are we happy with the effort we put forth?
Now, why exactly do we say humility and grace?
Because sometimes, like I'll say on this benchmark day, guaranteed, someone's going to come in and they're going to say, Luke, my kid got sick or I didn't sleep well because X, Y, Z, and they don't PR, even though they've been busting their butt, they've been doing the right things, and then they're harder on themselves than they need to be. It's like life is going to happen at times no matter what we do, right? And it's like we're not always in our best circumstance. We're not always going to succeed in everything that we do, so we got to take a look. Like, did we not succeed because we were doing the wrong things or because some extenuating circumstance that was beyond our control, put pressure on us that wasn't positive? Because kids will get sick. Like if you're a parent, like your kids get sick, there's nothing you've done to cause that kid to get sick.
Your red line might look different that day.
Your red line looks different that day, and they will ebb and flow with the circumstances we're in. But have some grace. So we need humility to not think that we're always giving our best effort. We need grace to realize that it's like we don't always have the capability to give our absolute best effort either.
Or our best effort might look different that day.
That day, yes. So that is going to be episode 1. We're going to try to get, what is our goal? Get 8 of these in before the year end?
Yes. I think there's 8 weeks left after either this week or next week. There should be 8 weeks left. So we're trying to get a podcast a week for the remaining part of 2023. Thanks for listening to this episode. Feel free to leave a rating on Spotify and other platforms. Check us out on Instagram @ToeTheRedLine. We'll post Redline challenges, and we'd love to connect and interact with more of our listeners. Go out and conquer your day, and never forget to toe the red line.